The first thing Dahlia noticed when she walked into the Ashford Grand was that her coat had a hole in the lining. Not a small one, a proper tear, right along the left seam, where the silk had given up sometime between the bus and the revolving door. She'd felt the cold air come in around her elbow and looked down, and there it was, her mother's coat. The one she'd borrowed because her own winter jacket had a broken zipper, and she hadn't had time or money to replace it. She pulled her arm close to her body and kept walking. The Gala was on the 4th floor. She knew because Stephanie had texted it to her 3 times, in capital letters, with the note, "Don't be late, don't embarrass me, don't say anything weird about numbers." The last one stung a little, even now. Stephanie was her half-sister, technically. Same father, different mothers, different worlds, and she'd only invited Dahlia because their father's business partners expected the whole family present. Something about optics. Something about looking complete. Dahlia rode the elevator alone. The doors opened and the sound hit her first. Crystal and conversation and heels on marble. The kind of noise that cost money to produce. She stepped out and was immediately aware of her coat, her shoes. Block-heeled and practical. Wrong in every possible way. And the fact that she'd worn her hair up because it looked professional, and professional was apparently not the dress code tonight. Stephanie found her within 30 seconds. That was a talent of hers. "You wore that," she said. Not loudly, quietly, which was somehow worse, because it was the kind of quiet that assumed everyone nearby could hear and agree. "I told you it was cocktail." "That's Dahlia, that's a blazer. It's a dress blazer. It's wool. It's cold outside." Stephanie looked at her the way you look at a smudge on a window, not angry, just tired of it being there. She was in red, of course she was. Backless, fitted with earrings that probably cost more than Dahlia's month's rent. She had their father's cheekbones and their father's confidence, and none of his debt, because Dahlia's mother had taken the debt when she left, and Stephanie's mother had taken the house. "Just stay near the bar," Stephanie said. "Don't hover around Dad. He's trying to make an impression tonight." "On who?" But Stephanie had already turned, and someone was calling her name from across the room, and she was gone. Smile up, shoulders back, red dress catching the light like she was designed for exactly this. Dahlia went to the bar. She ordered sparkling water, because she was on the early shift tomorrow, and because she didn't trust herself in rooms like this with anything stronger. She stood with her back to the wall and looked at the room and counted things, the way she always did when she was uncomfortable. 12 chandeliers, 4 emergency exits, roughly 200 guests, one man standing alone near the window who hadn't moved in the last 4 minutes. She looked away. The evening passed in the way these evenings always passed for her, in fragments. Fragments of conversation she wasn't part of. Fragments of laughter from clusters of people who all knew each other and had known each other for years. She spoke to her father briefly. He looked at her coat and said nothing, which meant something. He introduced her to a business contact as, "My daughter, she does bookkeeping," and then moved on before the man had finished, saying it was nice to meet her. She found a pillar and stood beside it. It was around the 2nd hour that she heard Stephanie's voice carry across a lull in the music. "She's always been like this," Stephanie was saying. She was in a small group, champagne glass tilted just so, the way it always was when she was performing rather than drinking. She'd rather read a spreadsheet than talk to a human being. Dad used to say she had her mother's personality. The women around her laughed. Not cruelly, casually, which was its own kind of cruel. "She audited our father's accounts when she was 17, Stephanie continued, and there was something in her voice that Dahlia recognized, not pride, but the shape of something that used to be pride, worn down into a joke. Found 3 errors nobody else caught. Reported them. To the board. She smiled. She's very thorough." More laughter. Dahlia looked down at her sparkling water. She was not going to cry. She hadn't cried at a function since she was 23, and she wasn't going to start now, and certainly not over this, over Stephanie being Stephanie in a room that was built for Stephanie. It wasn't even a betrayal. It was just weather. You didn't get angry at rain. She set down her glass and decided to find her coat. She was coming back from the cloakroom when she turned a corner near the east corridor and nearly walked into a man coming the other way. She stepped back. Sorry, he didn't move. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not surprise, not annoyance, something more like assessment. He was tall, not conspicuously so, but enough that she registered it. Dark suit, no tie, which stood out here. A watch that was expensive without announcing itself. His hair was going grey at the temples. There was a scar along the left side of his jaw, thin and old, the kind that had stopped telling stories and just lived there now. He looked like a man who was accustomed to people stepping out of his way and who had simply stopped noticing that they did. You're Callahan's daughter, he said. It wasn't a question. One of them, she said. Something shifted in his face. Barely. The bookkeeper. The word landed the way it always did, diminishing, like a door closing. She'd heard it her whole life. She was used to the specific weight of it, the way people said it to mean small without quite saying so. Accountant, she said. Forensic, actually. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Harlan's missing $400,000. She blinked. Excuse me. Your father. He's short $400,000 from the Brennan Street property acquisition. The paperwork went through his secondary holding in March, the one registered under the numbered company. Whoever processed it moved the shortfall to a line item in operational overhead. It's been sitting there since spring. Delia stared at him. How do you know that? She said. I read his books, he said, before tonight. She felt something sharpen in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite interest. Something between the two that she didn't have a name for. He's in debt to you. He's in a relationship with me, the man said, and his voice was perfectly even. That requires accurate numbers, and his numbers are not accurate. That's a very polite way to say what you just said. I'm a polite man. She almost laughed. She didn't, but it was close. He extended his hand. Rourke, just the one name, no first name, no title. She shook it, because she'd been raised to shake hands even when she didn't know why. Delia, she said. I know, he said. He knew. Of course he did. She filed that away without examining it. He said, I'd like you to look at something. She didn't follow him. Not immediately. That would have been reckless, and she was not a reckless person. She asked him 3 questions first. What he wanted her to look at, why he thought she was qualified, and whether this was going to create a problem for her professionally. He answered the first 2 without pause and looked at the third one for a moment before saying, That depends on what you find, which was not reassuring. She followed him anyway. He led her to a small side room off the main hall. One of the hotel's working rooms, she realized, not rented for the event. There was a laptop on the table, open, and 2 chairs. A man she didn't recognize stood near the door, arms loose at his sides, doing the things security does when it's trying to look like it isn't. Rourke sat. He gestured at the second chair. She sat and pulled the laptop toward her. It was a financial record, layered, complex, the kind that had been put together by someone who knew exactly which numbers to move to make everything look fine from a distance. She looked at it the way she looked at all documents like this. Not reading exactly, but letting her eyes find the shape of it, the weight distribution, the places where the columns didn't breathe quite right. She found the first inconsistency in about 90 seconds. This transfer, she said, pointing. It's dated the 14th, but the holding account it draws from wasn't registered until the 17th. Someone backdated it. Rourke said nothing. And this one, she scrolled down. This is using a GST number that belongs to a company that was dissolved in 2021. Either whoever did this didn't know, or they were counting on nobody checking. Which do you think? She looked at the rest of the document, at the careful, deliberate way the errors were placed, at the pattern of them. They knew, she said. This is intentional. This isn't a mistake. Rourke leaned back in his chair. He was watching her the way she imagined he watched most things, with the patience of someone who had already decided how the conversation was going to end, and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Someone in your father's circle has been redirecting funds for 8 months, he said. Small enough each time to stay below threshold. The total is significant, he told her. She sat very still. You want me to find the source, she said. I want you to confirm what I already suspect, he said, and document it in a way that holds. That's forensic accounting. Yes. You're asking me to audit an organization I have no legal standing to audit. Your father's name is on the holding company, Rourke said. You're listed as a dependent in 2 of his earlier filings. Technically, that gives you standing in the family structure. He paused. Whether that satisfies your professional requirements is a question for your own conscience. She looked at him. That's an interesting way to frame coercion, she said. I'm not coercing you, he said, and he said it simply, without edge. You can leave. The door is there. No one will stop you. She looked at the door. She looked at the document. She thought about her father, who hadn't looked at her coat, who had introduced her as she does bookkeeping, who owed this man, this careful, watchful, scarred man, a sum she couldn't say aloud without feeling faintly ill. If I do this, she said, I do it properly, my way. I don't sign off on anything that isn't accurate, and I don't produce a result that isn't supported by the documents. I don't want a result, Rourke said. I want the truth. Those aren't always the same thing. I know, he said. That's why I'm asking you. She pulled the laptop closer. She worked until midnight. The man near the door, she eventually learned his name was Tomas, brought her coffee without being asked, which she appreciated. Rourke was in the room for some of it, and absent for stretches, coming and going in the particular quiet way of someone accustomed to moving without announcing himself. When he was present, he didn't hover. He sat with his own documents, or stood at the window, or answered calls in a voice too low for her to hear. He never asked how she was progressing. She noticed that. She found it. It wasn't in the most recent records. It was in a set of payments made in late February, a recurring transfer to a consulting company with a British Columbia registration and an address that, when she looked it up, turned out to be a mailbox. The transfers were small individually. Together they were not, and the authorization on each one carried a digital signature that traced back through 2 layers of internal access codes to a single user ID. She wrote down the name. She sat with it for a moment. She said, You already knew. Rourke was at the window. He turned. I suspected, he said. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. She looked at the name on the page. Someone her father trusted. Someone who had been in his office, at his table, at functions like this one's, smiling, present, offering advice. She thought about how long it took to build that kind of trust and how easily it could be used. What happens to them? She said. That's not your concern. I'm making it my concern. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen yet, not displeasure, but something that might have been recalibration, like she'd said something that had landed somewhere unexpected. They'll be removed, he said, from your father's circle and from mine. Beyond that, he paused. I'm a practical man, Delia. I'm not interested in theatrics. It wasn't reassurance, but it was something like accuracy, and she'd learned to value accuracy over comfort. My father, she said, his debt is separate from this conversation. I know it is, she said. I'm asking anyway. Rourke looked at her for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a few seconds. His face didn't change, exactly, but something in the arrangement of it shifted, some slight reconsideration she couldn't name. His debt, he said carefully, will be restructured. The terms will be different. How different? More manageable, he said, in exchange for the consulting. She looked at him. The consulting? Whoever did this was inside for 8 months, he said. There are 3 other holding structures I'd like reviewed. The work is substantial. The compensation is also substantial. Delia set down her pen. She looked at the document in front of her, at the months of careful, methodical theft, at her own handwriting in the margin, neat and precise and damning. She looked at the man standing by the window, who had known her name before she said it, who had sat in the same room as her father for years and noticed the numbers and said nothing, who had looked at her wool blazer and her practical shoes and her sparkling water and decided, for reasons she didn't entirely understand, that she was the one he wanted in this chair. I'm not joining your organization, she said. I'm not asking you to. I'm a contractor, independent. I submit invoices. I keep my own records. I don't sign anything that says otherwise. Agreed. And if I find something that implicates my father? You document it accurately, he said. The same as anything else. She said nothing for a moment. That might be difficult, she said quietly. Personally. Yes, he said. I imagine it would be. He didn't say it would be fine. He didn't say it wouldn't be as bad as she thought. He just acknowledged the thing she'd named and let it sit there, and somehow that was the thing she'd been needing someone to do for so long she hadn't noticed the absence of it until now. She picked up her pen. I'll need access to the February files, she said. The originals, not copies. You'll have them Monday. I'll need to verify the consultant registration independently. Thomas will provide the documentation, and I need a point of contact. Direct, not filtered through anyone else. Rourke moved away from the window. He crossed the room, unhurried, the same way he did everything, and stopped at the table. He took a card from the inside pocket of his jacket and set it down in front of her. No logo, just a number. Direct, he said. She looked at the card. She looked up at him. From this close, she could see the tiredness in him more clearly. Not fragility, nothing about this man read as fragile, but the particular weight of someone who had been making hard decisions for a long time and had stopped expecting them to become easier. The scar along his jaw, the grey at his temples, the way he stood like a man who had stopped being surprised by rooms that tried to exclude him and had simply decided to require himself into them anyway. She thought, for a strange moment, of her coat, the torn lining, the cold along her elbow. She thought about Stephanie's voice. She does bookkeeping. She picked up the card. She found Stephanie in the hallway on her way out. Stephanie was saying goodbye to someone, laughing at something, champagne nearly finished. She saw Delia and her expression shifted to the familiar one. The slight elevation of the chin, the look that said, "You're still here, leaving?" Stephanie said, "Yes, how was your evening?" Delia thought about the room with the laptop and the coffee that arrived without asking, the name she'd written in the margin, the card in her coat pocket through the torn lining pressed against the inside of her wrist. "Fine," she said. She walked to the elevator. She rode it down alone. Outside her, the November air came in around her elbow where the lining had torn, and she didn't pull her arm close this time. She just let the cold be cold and stood on the sidewalk waiting for her car and thought about the number on the card and the documents on Monday and the particular expression on Rourke's face when she'd said, "I'm making it my concern." He hadn't told her no. He'd looked at her like someone who had been counting on her saying exactly that and had been patient enough to wait. She got in the car. She watched the Ashford Grand get small in the window behind her. She thought, the numbers don't lie. That's the thing about them. People build whole architectures of story on top of them, debts and favors and family names and what you owe and who you are, but underneath all of it, the numbers just sit there, patient, accurate, waiting for someone to look. She'd been looking her whole life. She supposed it was only a matter of time before someone noticed.